What if I told you that the biggest thief in your life isn't a person, a job, or even your past mistakes, but something far more silent, far more dangerous? It's time. Not in the poetic, ticking clock kind of way. I mean the moments you don't even notice slipping. The conversations you didn't want to have. The meetings that drained your soul. The hours spent scrolling, comparing, doubting, pretending. The plans you made for others. The life you've been living that, deep down, doesn't feel like it belongs to you. The truth? You're not tired because you've done too much. You're tired because you've spent too little time doing what actually matters to you. There's a chilling moment when this truth catches up. For Eliot, it came late one night in Chicago, after another meaningless day at a job that once excited him, but now only felt like an obligation. He wasn't unhappy. He was numb. There's a difference, and it's more dangerous. Unhappiness demands change. Numbness lulls you into inertia. And that night, sitting in his apartment with the soft hum of traffic outside, Eliot opened an old folder on his laptop, Iceland 2015. Inside were photos, vivid, raw, stunning, taken by him. He had once been alive enough to chase sunsets, to wander unfamiliar roads with a camera in hand, to care about the angle of light. But now, he was surviving, not living. In that still room, something inside him broke. Or maybe something inside him finally woke up. We don't talk enough about this. We say life is short, but we live like we have forever. We wait to start that business, wait to take that trip, wait to say what we mean, wait to become who we are. All the while, time moves on, calm, quiet, merciless. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic philosopher emperor, wrote, "Think of yourself as dead. You have lived your life. Now take what's left and live it properly." What sounds like a morbid warning is actually a powerful invitation. An invitation to stop giving your life away to noise, to fear, to what doesn't serve you. You don't need more time. You need to stop wasting the time you already have. We think we're being responsible when we sacrifice ourselves for expectations, when we answer every text immediately, when we sit through pointless meetings, when we bury our dreams under maybe later. But responsibility to others means nothing if you abandon responsibility to yourself. You were not born to be a background character in your own story. And here's the twist. The world will never ask you to choose yourself. It will keep giving you reasons not to. Deadlines, obligations, bills, expectations, guilt. But at some point you have to decide that your life is too precious to be spent unconsciously. So how do you begin? Start by conducting what I call a time inventory. For 7 days, track how you spend every hour. Be brutal, be honest. Then look at the data. How much time went toward what actually feeds you? How much was spent just existing, not living? When Eliot did this, he was stunned. Over 20 hours a week, gone to things he neither enjoyed nor needed. That discovery wasn't depressing. It was liberating, because buried in that data was an answer. The time is there. You just have to reclaim it. He began waking up 30 minutes earlier, not for work, but for photography. He stopped saying yes to every invite. He set a rule: 1 hour a day belongs to him and only him. A year later, he wasn't just happier, he was fully alive. This isn't about quitting your job or abandoning your responsibilities. It's about remembering that your life is yours, that your time is currency, and how you spend it defines your values, your joy, your legacy. If any part of you felt seen while hearing this, it's not a coincidence. It's a signal, a whisper from the part of you that's been waiting to be heard, to be chosen, to be lived. And if you want more, stories like Eliot's, real, raw, and rooted in ancient wisdom, subscribe to the channel. Your support gives us the strength to keep making content that changes lives, one story at a time. Now, before you go, let's turn inward. Question for you. If you had to choose just one way to reclaim your time starting today, which would it be? A. Set 1 hour a day for something that fuels you. B. Cut one toxic obligation or habit this week. Drop your answer in the comments, A or B. and let's grow through this together. There's a kind of quiet misery that creeps in not through failure, but through comparison. It doesn't scream. It whispers, subtly, consistently, until you no longer see your own life through your eyes, but through the distorted lens of someone else's highlight reel. Camila knew this feeling too well. A rising designer living in Barcelona, she had talent, clients, and a future most would envy. But every morning, before her feet hit the ground, her thumb was already scrolling. Instagram, Pinterest, LinkedIn. In a matter of minutes, she was lost in a parade of seemingly perfect lives. Colleagues launching brands, influencers in Greece, former classmates giving TED Talks. Each post chipped away at her confidence. It wasn't envy, it was erosion. She'd close the app and stare at her own work. Suddenly, her palette looked dull, her designs unimpressive. She began to question herself. Was she too slow? Too average? Was she missing something everyone else had figured out? This is the mirror trap, the illusion that to know your worth, you must see it reflected in someone else's story. But comparison isn't a mirror. It's a funhouse distortion, always stretching, warping, shrinking what's real. And the more you look, the more you forget what you actually look like. Social media amplifies this distortion. What was once a tool for connection has evolved into a stage for curated perfection. We scroll not to be inspired, but to evaluate ourselves, our pace, our potential. And in that game, no one wins. Camila's turning point didn't come from a book or a crisis. It came from silence. One afternoon, after another spiraling scroll session, she closed her laptop and stood by her studio window. The late sun cast soft shadows across her workspace. Her unfinished sketches rested on the table. And in that moment, she asked herself a simple question. If I had never seen what others were doing, what would I be creating? The answer startled her. There was a collection she had dreamed of designing for years, a line inspired by the Moorish architecture of Andalusia. But she never started it. It didn't look trendy. It didn't align with what the successful designers on social media were doing. So she buried it until that moment. That evening, she began the first sketch, not because it was strategic, but because it was hers. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself." This is the essence of Stoic wisdom. You don't find peace by controlling the world. You find it by returning to what's within, your vision, your voice, your values. Camila's journey back to herself began with 2 new practices. First, a digital fast every weekend. No scrolling, no external noise, just creating. Second, a journal called What I Know Is True. Each morning, she wrote 3 things she believed about her own work, independent of validation. I bring emotion into every design. I listen deeply to clients' needs. I work with heart. These weren't boasts. They were anchors, reminders of what couldn't be measured by likes or shares, and slowly, the mirror shattered. She began to see her path not as inferior, but as incomparable, because it was hers alone. The danger of comparison isn't just the damage it does to your confidence, it's how it reroutes your life. Every time you measure your worth by someone else's timeline, you veer a little further from your own. Over time, you don't just lose belief, you lose direction. But the antidote isn't isolation, it's intention. Be mindful of who and what you allow to influence your vision. Ask yourself, is this feeding my creativity or starving it? Is this reminding me of who I am or convincing me I'm not enough? Because here's the truth. Someone else's success is not your failure. Their timeline is not your deadline. Their style, their pace, their path, it's not a threat. It's irrelevant. Your work, your growth, your purpose, these are sacred. They deserve protection, not from the world, but from your own tendency to compare. Camila still uses social media, but differently now. She curates her feed like she curates her materials, intentionally, selectively. She's no longer trying to match the world's rhythm. She's listening for her own. So the next time you catch yourself in that spiral, remember this. Comparison is not awareness. It's distraction. and your life deserves more than to be constantly measured against someone else's. There's a kind of fatigue that no sleep can fix, a mental exhaustion from being pulled in 1,000 directions, none of which are your own. It builds slowly. A ping here, a buzz there, an email, a comment, a random article you didn't mean to click, and suddenly, your day is no longer yours. Jordan knew this fatigue intimately. Living in Austin and working in tech, his days were dense with data, updates, meetings, and screen time. He convinced himself that productivity was about always being reachable. But after a while, he wasn't just reachable, he was being devoured. It started subtly. He'd reach for his phone before opening his eyes. By lunch, he'd already forgotten what his priorities were for the day. By evening, his mind was fogged with half-read messages, unsent replies, and tasks left dangling in the background. His body was present, but his mind was scattered. Then came the night he sat in his apartment, trying to finish a project that once excited him. He stared at the glowing screen, unable to focus. His thoughts were fractured. His heartbeat raced, but not from stress, from overstimulation. For the first time, he realized he hadn't heard silence in weeks. Not just the absence of sound, but the presence of stillness. He couldn't remember what peace even felt like. That moment marked the beginning of Jordan's noise detox. Distraction doesn't always come dressed as chaos. Sometimes it looks like a to-do list. Sometimes it sounds like a notification chime. In a world obsessed with connection, we've lost connection with ourselves, and that loss is expensive. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If you are disturbed by external things, it is not they that trouble you, but your own judgment of them." Distractions may be everywhere, but it's our permission that lets them in. Jordan didn't go off the grid. He didn't quit his job or delete all his apps. What he did was far more radical. He chose boundaries. He began by creating what he called a digital sunset. Every night at 8 p.m., his devices powered down. No exceptions. The first few nights were uncomfortable. His hands itched for his phone. His mind searched for stimulation. But slowly, something beautiful happened. He began to feel time again. He read. He cooked. He sat with his thoughts. Silence, once terrifying, became sacred. He added a 30-minute solitude block to his mornings. No screens, no music, no talking. Just reflection. Sometimes he journaled. Sometimes he stared out the window. Sometimes he cried. It wasn't always peaceful, but it was always real. And that realness began to restore him. Jordan also learned to say no, not just to people, but to distractions masquerading as obligations. He declined unnecessary meetings. He turned off push notifications for everything except direct calls. He stopped multitasking and started monotasking, doing one thing with full attention and doing it well. The results were subtle but seismic. He slept better. He laughed more. His creativity returned, not in bursts, but in waves. For the first time in years, he wasn't surviving the week. He was savoring it. We often think peace comes from escape, a vacation, a retreat, a weekend away. But real peace isn't found somewhere else. It's built, one boundary at a time, in the life you already have. If you feel like you're drowning in digital chaos, ask yourself this. When was the last time you were bored on purpose? Not scrolling, not checking, just being? Boredom isn't the enemy. It's the birthplace of clarity, of ideas, of healing. The Stoics believed that tranquility isn't the absence of noise, but the mastery of it. You don't need to silence the new world. You just need to reclaim your space within it. Try this. Declare your own digital sunset. Choose a time each day when the outside world no longer gets a say in how your evening unfolds. Guard it like your life depends on it, because in many ways your inner life does, or commit to one solitude block a day. No phone, no agenda, just 15-30 minutes of stillness. You'll be surprised how loud your soul becomes when you finally listen. Jordan still works in tech. His phone still rings. His inbox still fills. But he no longer lives at the mercy of the noise. He's carved out space to breathe, to think, to be. And in that space, he's found something most people spend their lives searching for: peace that doesn't depend on escape. There comes a moment in life, not loud, not dramatic, when everything feels misaligned. You're checking every box, hitting every target, living what many would call the dream. And yet, something inside whispers, "This isn't it." Harper had one of those lives. A respected attorney in San Francisco, she had the accolades, the clients, and the view from the 29th floor of a sleek high-rise. To everyone else, she had arrived. But she woke up most mornings with a pit in her stomach and went to bed with a question pressing against her chest. What am I actually building? It wasn't burnout. It was misalignment, a subtle but suffocating disconnect between the life she was living and the life she quietly longed for. From the outside, it was impossible to tell. Her days were productive, her calendar full, her bank account healthy. But internally, she felt like she was living on autopilot, chasing success defined by someone else's rules. One weekend, she drove out to Big Sur. No phone, no clients, just waves, wind, and stillness. She brought a journal, more out of habit than intention. But as the hours stretched without interruptions, something happened. The noise in her mind quieted, and for the first time in a long time, she could hear herself again. She wrote one question on a blank page: what would my life look like if it was truly mine? The answer didn't come in a lightning bolt. It came in fragments. She didn't want to leave the legal field. She believed in justice, in advocacy, but she didn't want to serve corporations anymore. She wanted to use her voice to fight for people who couldn't afford big retainers. She wanted to wake up proud of the work she did, and more than that, she wanted to live in a way that felt like a reflection, not a performance. That trip changed everything, not overnight, but permanently. When she returned to the city, she created something she called her life compass, a simple exercise inspired by the Stoic idea of living in harmony with one's values. She wrote down her 5 non-negotiable values: authenticity, justice, compassion, growth, and peace. Then she reviewed every major area of her life: career, relationships, health, time, and asked, is this aligned? Most of it wasn't, and that clarity, though painful, was empowering. She didn't make drastic changes all at once. She started small. She declined projects that felt off. She volunteered for a local legal aid clinic. She scheduled time for rest and stopped apologizing for it. Slowly, she realigned her life with her compass. Epictetus once said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." Harper took that to heart. She defined herself first, not as what others needed, but as who she chose to be. And then, step by step, she became her own definition. Living in alignment doesn't mean quitting your job or burning your life down. It means honoring what's true for you and letting that truth guide your decisions. It's not always easy. In fact, it's often inconvenient. But the peace it brings is worth every uncomfortable choice. Harper now works with nonprofits, focusing on youth justice. Her income dropped, but her life expanded. She has time to read, to cook, to walk in the morning fog without rushing. And most importantly, she sleeps well, not because her to-do list is empty, but because her heart is full. Alignment isn't about perfection, it's about integrity, about closing the gap between your internal truth and your external actions. The smaller that gap becomes, the freer you feel. So if you've been moving fast but feeling lost, stop. Not forever. Just long enough to ask, is this path mine? Or was it handed to me by someone else's expectation? Here's a simple start. Choose 5 values that define the life you want to live. Then take a quiet hour this week to map your current reality against them. Where are you aligned? Where are you off course? Don't judge, just notice. That awareness alone is powerful, and then ask yourself, what's one small adjustment I can make this week to live more honestly? Because here's the truth. Success, without alignment, will always feel empty. But a quiet life built on values, that's where fulfillment begins. Progress often looks unimpressive while it's happening. It's quiet, unassuming, It hides in routine, in repetition, in the days where nothing extraordinary seems to occur. But this is where resilience is born, not in the grand moments, but in the slow, often invisible choice to keep showing up for yourself. Noah knew this reality intimately. As an art teacher in Seattle, he spent his days encouraging his students to take risks, to create without fear. But behind his calm demeanor and affirming words, he held a secret. He hadn't painted for himself in over 2 years. His sketchbook sat untouched in his closet, gathering dust. Not because he lacked time, but because every time he sat down to create, a voice in his head whispered, "It won't be good enough." That voice didn't come from nowhere. Years ago, he'd applied to a prestigious residency program. He poured everything into his submission, his heart, his vision, his belief that maybe, just maybe, he was ready to step into something greater. The rejection came fast, cold, impersonal, but its impact lingered. It convinced him that perhaps his art wasn't meant for the world after all. What followed was subtle, yet profound. Noah stopped creating for himself. He poured all his energy into his students. He told himself that was enough, that teaching was his contribution. But late at night, when the city grew still, he'd feel it, that aching pull toward the canvas. A part of him was still alive, still wanting to try again. He just didn't know how. One day, after a particularly inspired class critique, a student turned to him and said, "Mr. K, how come you never show us your work?" The question hit like a wave. Noah stammered through an answer, but he couldn't shake the truth. He'd been hiding, and the only way out was forward. That night, he made a decision, not to reclaim success, but to reclaim process. He promised himself he'd paint for 30 minutes every night. No deadlines, no themes, no judgment, just the act of showing up. The first few nights were frustrating. His hands felt stiff, his colors clashed, but he kept going. 10 days in, something shifted. He stopped critiquing and started expressing. His brush moved freely, not because the work was flawless, but because he was finally creating from a place of truth, not fear. This is the core of resilience. Not toughness, not perfection, but willingness. To keep returning to yourself even when you doubt, even when you've failed, even when the world has forgotten what you're capable of. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." That quote lived in Noah's sketchbook now. He read it every night before he painted. It reminded him that setbacks weren't signs to stop, but invitations to grow stronger. As his practice deepened, so did his confidence, not just in art, but in life. He noticed how much more patient he became with others, how he handled criticism with calm, how he began to speak up in faculty meetings. The act of returning to his passion gave him more than skills. It gave him identity again. Eventually, Noah shared one of his pieces online, not for praise, but to declare to himself, "I am still here." The response was kind, supportive, but more importantly, it didn't matter anymore. His validation came from the process, not the reaction. Progress that centers on others will always depend on their applause. But progress rooted in the self is steady, quiet, unshakable. It builds resilience because it teaches you to stay the course, even when the road disappears under your feet. Noah now encourages his students not just to submit perfect work, but to keep resilience journals. In them, they reflect on what they tried, where they stumbled, what they learned. He teaches them that growth isn't linear, that showing up messy is better than staying silent. And in doing so, he's building a classroom and a life founded on truth. If you're searching for strength, don't look for it in accomplishments. Look for it in your ability to come back to your purpose, especially when it's hard, especially when no one is watching, especially when your voice shakes. Because that's where real resilience lives, in the quiet, defiant act of becoming again and again, despite it all. Not every transformation starts with a breakdown. Sometimes it begins with a whisper, A quiet awareness that the life you're living, while full, isn't full of you. That was how it started for Leila. No dramatic event, no life-shattering loss. Just a slow, building realization in the middle of a crowded New York City morning. She felt invisible inside her own life. She had built everything she was supposed to. A successful marketing career, a luxury apartment, a schedule booked weeks in advance. Her calendar was a symbol of value. People needed her. Meetings depended on her. But somewhere between the client calls and curated dinners, she had lost her own reflection. She was living a life made of achievement, yet none of it felt like home. One Sunday morning, while sipping coffee and watching the city stir to life from her 18th floor balcony, she allowed herself a dangerous question. If I stripped everything away, titles, appointments, accolades, who would be left? The silence that followed didn't terrify her. It intrigued her. For the first time, she didn't fill it with noise. She sat with it. A few months later, she packed a suitcase and left the city. Not in a blaze of rebellion, but in a quiet act of reclaiming. Sedona, Arizona wasn't the plan, it just felt right. Wide skies, red rocks, stillness. She rented a small house with more windows than walls and began the slow, unfamiliar process of becoming. Leila didn't disappear. She unlayered. Piece by piece, she let go of the life she had built for recognition and began building one rooted in intention. She started each morning not with emails, but with breath. She cooked without rushing. She walked without headphones. She journaled every night, not to track goals, but to return to herself. There were moments of doubt, sometimes loneliness. The silence she once feared now held a mirror up to every hidden part of her. But over time, she began to see clearly. The noise she once depended on had been hiding her truth. Now, without it, she could finally hear her own voice, and she liked what she heard. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live." Leila hadn't been afraid of dying. She had been afraid of waking up one day and realizing she had never truly lived. Not by her own standards, at least. Self-focus wasn't about shutting the world out. It was about letting the right things in. She began to rebuild, on her terms. Her work shifted. She started consulting only with brands she believed in, ones that prioritized meaning over market share. She worked fewer hours, but with more depth. She began mentoring young women, not to expand her network, but to offer what she wished someone had given her: honesty and permission to be real. She also redefined success. It wasn't a promotion or a follower count. It was how present she felt when she sipped tea on her porch. It was how often she laughed. It was how at peace she felt, walking alone under a sky full of stars, knowing she had nothing to prove. This was the quiet revolution. A life reshaped not through ambition, but through alignment. It didn't need an audience. It didn't need applause. It just needed truth. Leila still gets asked if she misses the city. She smiles. Sometimes, she says, the energy, the movement. But she doesn't miss who she was in it. She doesn't miss the noise she mistook for purpose. She doesn't miss living a life built on performance. She has discovered something far more powerful than hustle: harmony. The quiet revolution is not about withdrawing. It's about choosing. Choosing what matters. Choosing when to say no. Choosing to guard your time like your life depends on it, because it does. It's about remembering that your worth is not tied to your productivity, but to your presence. Leila's days are still full, but with space, with intention, with silence that feels like music. And within that space, she has become someone she recognizes again, someone she respects. Not every story of change has a dramatic ending. Some simply have a beginning, the kind that happens when you finally decide to come home to yourself, when you stop measuring your life by its noise and start honoring it for its depth. That's the revolution, quiet, steady, transformative, and it starts when you do. Looking back at the journeys of Eliot, Camila, Jordan, Harper, Noah, and Leila, a pattern quietly emerges, not of grand victories or overnight success, but of deep inner shifts. Each of them began from a different place. Eliot was buried under obligation, Camila lost in the mirrors of comparison, Jordan consumed by noise, Harper misaligned from her values, Noah paralyzed by fear of failure, and Leila numbed by a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt hollow within. Yet, they all found their way back to themselves. Eliot reclaimed his time and gave his passion permission to live again. Camila shattered the illusion that her value depended on others, and in doing so, rediscovered her creative spark. Jordan pulled himself from the flood of constant distraction, choosing instead to carve space for peace and intention. Harper had the courage to look at the life she had built and ask the hardest question, "Is this mine?" When the answer was no, she reoriented, one choice at a time. Noah, once silenced by rejection, found his resilience not in success, but in his steady return to the canvas. And Leila, with quiet grace, walked away from noise and into her own rhythm, where alignment replaced ambition and fulfillment followed stillness. Together, their stories offer a powerful reflection of what can happen when we stop living outwardly and start listening inwardly. They are proof that transformation doesn't need to be loud, it doesn't need to be praised. It only needs to be real. The lesson is clear. Your life becomes meaningful the moment you choose to live it on your own terms. Not when others validate it, not when it matches a timeline, not when it's free from failure, but when it is deeply aligned with your inner truth. So how do we apply this to our lives now? Start small. Choose 1 hour each day that belongs only to you. No notifications, no obligations, no performance. Let it be a space where you can hear yourself again. Take a truth inventory. What are you doing that doesn't feel like you? What parts of your life are noise, and which parts are signal? Who are you when no one is watching? Progress doesn't require perfection. It only requires presence. Choose to show up for yourself. Set boundaries that protect your energy. Reflect on your values and allow them, not the expectations of others, to guide your decisions. And above all, remember that stillness isn't laziness. It's where you meet your most honest self. Here's something for you to reflect on now. If you could take one meaningful action this week to move closer to the life you really want, what would you choose? A. Block out 1 hour every day for something deeply personal. Writing, painting, meditating, or dreaming. B. Let go of one commitment, habit, or relationship that no longer aligns with who you're becoming. Comment your answer below, A or B, and take that first step today. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What part of this story resonated with you the most? What's your biggest takeaway? Comment your thoughts below so others can read and reflect with you. Let's grow together. If you found value in this story and want to keep walking this path of self-discovery, resilience, and intentional living, hit the subscribe button. Your support means everything. It helps us keep creating content that inspires real change. We'll see you in the next one. Until then, keep choosing yourself every day in small ways, because the quiet revolution always begins from within.